All right. Thanks. Thanks for the great
Your line is now
introduction.
muted.
So, okay, so what I did is I just created a couple of slides here just to tell you guys a little story. And okay, so thank you, Ryan.
Your line is
Nice
now
comment.
unmuted.
And I guess most of you guys, you probably know me from GNS3 Vault. That's where I created all of those labs. And I also created networklessons.com. That's basically where I do a lot of blogging. So what I'll do is I'll first give you a little bit of background info, like what I did, where I came from, and so on. So what we'll do, I'll give you a short introduction. I'll tell you what I did in like the last 10 years. Give you a couple of studying tips. And a lot of people ask me like, okay, so what should I do to pass the CCNA or CCNP, or what do I have to do for CCIE or anything else? And basically, I always give the same advice. So, give you a couple of studying tips. The CCIE, I passed it in December last year, and I'd like to share you, well, basically my experience, like what it was like, what I did for studying, and so on. And also, I'll talk a little bit about some upcoming projects, the things I'm working on right now. And like William said, we'll do a little Q&A. So if you have any questions, just let me know. And the first thing I'd like to share with you is like, what did I for like the last 10 years? And most of you know me from GNS3 Vault, and I'm doing all of these Cisco labs. But quite a long time ago, I started doing computer repairs. That's what I started with, and did this for a couple of years. It wasn't just networking from the beginning. I did a lot of computer repairs. So that's what I started with. And a couple of years later, okay, so Rodney is still doing it. A couple of years later, I kind of became a Microsoft guy. So I was looking at the NCSE certificate, and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool, and doing exams sounded like a lot of fun. So I was like, okay, I did a lot of Microsoft stuff back then, installing Server 2000, 2003, Active Directory, Exchange, stuff like that. I was a Microsoft guy. Did a lot of Microsoft, and also I did a bit of Linux. And basically I was a system engineer. And every now and then I also encountered some networking stuff. So saw some of the Cisco routers, some switches, and I had to do some, make some changes to the configuration of a router. Basically, I really had no idea what I was doing. It was all CLI. I didn't know any of the commands, and well, it was all very new to me. But the more and more I started to work with Cisco and the routers and the switches and some of the firewalls, the more I enjoyed it. So I moved from being a system engineer more towards a network. The more and more I worked with networks, the less I worked with Microsoft. So that's how things happened. And suddenly one of my customers, they had a training center. They asked me if I wanted to start teaching. And this was a huge step for me, basically because they asked me if I wanted to teach some of the Cisco courses. So CCNA and CCNP, I did the routing and switching courses, and I also did some wireless stuff, Cisco wireless, and maybe, I don't know if you guys know it, CWMP, it's like a vendor neutral wireless certificate. That's what I have been. Okay, so I see a question here. Who was your inspiration and how I started to get into the network side of IT? Well, that's a really good question. Basically, I never did anything else but IT. I think when I was like 6 or 7 years old, I think, my dad, he used to have a furniture store. He still does. And we had one single computer there. And it was used for, well, for the furniture store, bookkeeping and stuff like that. And we had a couple of games on that computer. And I was totally hooked to it. So the computer was my big magic box. I loved it. So the only thing I did was IT. And I did IT. I started working at a computer store and started doing some of the Microsoft stuff. And that's also how I got into networking. So I didn't really have any mentors or people that helped me get into networking or something. That's not how it really went for me. So, but I do have to say, once I started teaching, so the CCSI, that's where I met a couple of other teachers, a couple of CCIE guys who really knew a lot. There was like one guy who had so that's a good question from Jonathan. Something we should check perhaps. Can you guys hear me well? Or
I can hear you, but it's like really low. I'm not sure if it's because I'm dialed in. Maybe that's why.
okay, I could hear you very good. So just want to make sure you guys can hear me. So
That's a little better, actually. Yeah, thank you.
I'll try to move it a bit. Yeah? Okay. So I do see a question from Frank. That's a good question. Do you need a CCIE to become a CCSI? It's a good question, and it's kind of funny. For CCSI, so if you want to teach Cisco courses, there are only two things that you need. You need to pass the CCNA exam, so that's the first thing, and you have to do a 2-day exam. And the first day of the exam, it's a lab. It's on CCNA level, and the second day you have to do a couple of presentations. You need to pass the lab and you need to pass the second day with the presentations, and then you are a CCSI. So you don't need the CCIE in order to teach. So that's what you need to do. And I always think that's kind of funny. So if you do the CCNA and you pass the other exam, then you can teach any Cisco course. So if you pass for example, a CCNA voice exam, then you are allowed to teach it. That's what you have to do. Anyway, so during my time as a CCSI, I met a lot of other teachers, a couple of other CCIE guys, and they really inspired me to do the CCIE exam. Okay. So CCSI, and during my time as a CCSI, well, that's where I also started thinking about the CCIE, and I really wanted to do this, but I also knew that this was a lot of work. That's why I added this picture with the dream big, because unlike CCNA or CCNP, this is something you can do in like a couple of weeks. So this was a big dream for me. Also something that I learned during my time as a CCSI is that I started thinking about what the best way would be to teach networking. And one thing was really interesting is that in the official Cisco material, it has a lot of PowerPoint slides. And a lot of people found these really boring. So if you just have to listen to me talking for hours and hours, it's really boring. And the second thing is that you won't learn a lot from it. And this is the exact reason why I started GNS 3 Volt back then, because you will learn a lot if you do labs. So instead of just listening to a teacher explaining you things and just listening to him, it won't do you much good. So what works really well is that you should be working on labs. You should try things, configure things, try to become familiar with the commands. So what I did in my classes, I started to make labs, and instead of talking and using PowerPoints for hours, I would make up a lab and I would draw it on the board, and I would give them like a goal. Like for example, if they had to learn OSPF, I would just draw a little picture with a couple of routers, and I would tell them, I would give them a couple of goals, just like the labs on my website. And I did this in my classes, and it was working really well. So basically, the labs that I created in the classroom, I uploaded them to GNS 3 Volt, and that's how I started the website. So that's basically how GNS 3 Volt started. And that's what this picture is about. So here's a nice picture of my first lab. I had a couple of switches. The big box on the bottom, it's my Linux server with a couple of quad NICs. That's what I used for studying for the CCIE in the beginning. That's 2010. That's already 4 years ago. Yeah, time flies, right? Yeah. So something else. Last year, I started networklessons.com. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen it before, but on GNS 3 Volt, basically I only created labs. So I assumed that you already knew the theory. So you have to know OSPF before you can configure it. And I got a lot of questions on GNS 3 Volt, like what does the command mean, or why are you doing this, or how does it work, and so on. So I decided to start blogging a bit more, and that's when I created this website, Network Lessons. So this is not about labs, but this is where I do all of my blogging, and I try to explain things. I give you some configuration examples, but I think it really complements the GNS 3 Volt website. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. So the CCIE, and I'm really proud of that number over there, 41,726. Oh, good question from Ryan. Will there be more labs? Probably yes. And to be honest, I still have a lot of videos that I still should record. I've also been thinking about adding some more Asia labs, because there's no security stuff on the website right now. I do have a couple of security topics that are on the routing and switching track, but it would be nice to have some more Asia labs. I think I should also add a couple of more CCNA and CCNP labs. So I mean some of the bigger labs that cover more than just one protocol. Yep, ACL labs. I think I got a couple of those, standard, ACL, extended, time-based. But maybe we can create a couple of extra labs. But yeah, I think the short answer is that probably yes, I will be adding more labs. So that's the short version. That's my background. So from system engineer all the way to CCIE. Okay, so the next part is a bit about studying tips, and I think this might be useful for you. But what are you guys doing? Are you studying for CCNA, CCNP, CCIE, or what are you guys working on mostly? Leave a message in the chat over there. CCNA, CCNP, CCIE. Okay, so studying for interviews, that's a good one. Okay. So basically, I get a lot of questions about studying. And if you look at this picture, there's a lot of books in here. And some of the things people ask me is like, how am I supposed to remember everything after reading one single book? So there's a lot of information. If you're studying for, there's a lot of stuff you have to remember. So what's the best way to remember stuff? How should I study? And what's the best way? So there's a couple of things I want to share about this. And I think this picture is really important. I also try to explain this, like if you're learning, if you're studying, it doesn't matter if it's networking or anything else, but there's a really big difference between active learning and passive learning. And a lot of students, they spend a lot of time reading the books and they try to remember everything, all the little details, and they have a hard time doing so. And the other side, if you're looking at the active learning methods, you see, for example, that you see at the bottom, you see practice or teaching others. Teaching others is a very it's a very good way to learn stuff yourself. But if you're just reading a book, it's not as effective as doing a lot of practice. So short, look at this picture. Reading books is kind of boring, and even if you read a book 2 or 3 times, um, it's hard to remember everything. So what you should do, if you're trying to become a good network engineer, is combine these two things. So on the left side you see this nice Formula One car. I think it's a Formula One car. But if you're trying to become a network engineer, you should work on a lot of labs. You should look at each and every command. Look at what it does. Look at show commands. Use a lot of debug commands. Basically, you should be trying to take apart each and every protocol to really understand how it works. And you have to be precise. So you got to be like a surgeon. Look at all the little details. Check it out. So, and if you're doing this, so a lot of exercise, you need to do a lot of practice, you will learn a lot more than just reading books. So basically what I'm trying to tell here is spend most of your time doing exercises. Work on your routers, work on your switches, and don't just read books. If you really have no idea what you're doing, read a book, then immediately start practicing stuff on your lab. Yeah. Okay, so Scott is, I see a comment from Scott. Mind maps really help me. Okay, and I've added this. Let me talk about the mind maps first. I always advise to use mind maps. So if you're making notes, there are 2 ways of doing this. The first way is, if you look on the left side, you can just write down everything. And the downside of this is that you'll just have you'll have a lot of notes, but there is no structure in it. So the only thing you have is a lot of text on paper, and that's it. If you create a mind map, and on the right side you can see a little example of what I did for the CCNA exam. You can it's like a tree structure, and you can put your notes in a mind map like this. So, for example, you see CCNA. Yeah, like Rodney says, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So even though the mind map still has a lot of words, it looks like a picture, and it's easier to create a big mind map like this. So, for example, you can see a little, you see routing over there, a mind map, and if you're doing the CCNA, you're learning about routing. You have those routing protocols, OSPF, EIGRP, RIP. Well, RIP is gone from CCNA now, but when it used to be in the CCNA exam, there was a version 1 and a version 2 of RIP, and both versions each have their own little details that you need to remember and so. And if you're creating mind map like this, it's really easy to create your notes. So if you never heard about mind mapping before, you should give this a try. Try it out. I think you'll like it. And like Scott says, Xmind, it's a free tool. You can download it, and you can start creating these mind maps. So the next time you're studying, give it a try. See if you like it. Yeah. And I think this is important because if you go back to one of my previous slides, this one, it's really hard to memorize stuff. And I always found this really interesting because when I was teaching as a CCSI, I did a lot of CCNA boot camps. And with the CCNA boot camp, we did 10 days of CCNA. We started at 8 in the morning, and each day we ended at like 7 p.m. So those were long days. 10 days of hardcore studying. And at the end of those 10 days, if I would ask them a question about stuff that we talked about on day 1 or day 2, most of the students really had no idea what I was talking about. Because if you just learn about something, basically what you have to do is you have to review your notes. Otherwise you'll forget it. If you learn something today and you don't review it, then 3 weeks from now you'll have forgotten about it. So you got to review everything you're studying, and I think mind maps are a great way to review the things you learned. So that's something to think about. Yeah. Well, that's a good question. First of all, I think the entire the Cisco and their certificates and their courses, it's a big money machine because everybody knows about the, the networking certificates, and CCNA, CCNP, and CCIE are very well known. If you have a CCNA or CCNP, it's more important to have it than I don't know, one of the Juniper or UI certificates. So for Cisco, it's a big money machine. I do think that classroom teaching is very effective. But for example, if you want to learn about CCNA, and you never touched a network ever before, and you're going to a classroom course, then you're not getting all the value out of it. And I think it would be better than if you try to do some self-studying, and once you feel like you did 40 or 50% of the CCNA material, if you go to the classroom course then, it will be, first of all, it will be a bit easier for you, but I think you will also learn more. And you can ask some very specific questions at the instructor about the stuff that you don't know. So yeah, I think classroom courses are effective, but you shouldn't go to one if you don't know anything. And also I think that they are very expensive. So if it was my own money, I wouldn't easily yeah, go to a classroom course if I had to pay for it myself. But it basically it depends. Like for me, I really prefer self-studying because I can just move along as fast or as slow as I want to. But there are a lot of people who learn more if they're in the classroom course with other people and when they're not by themselves at home with a book. So that's what I think about it. Okay, so question from Rodney. Would you recommend doing the 2 exam track or just one? It's a good question. And last year, Cisco changed the CCNA track. Before they changed it, the first exam, ICND1, was a lot of basic networking. So it was about IP, TCP, UDP, Ethernet, a little bit of spanning tree, VLANs, and the second exam, ICND2, it was about OSPF, EIGRP, and so on. So I always said, okay, if you already know about basic networking, then just do it in one go, and just get it over with. If you are totally new to networking, then I would advise you to do the ICND1 first and then ICND2. But since last year, since they changed it, they moved a lot of topics from the second exam to the first exam. So there's quite some overlap between the 2 exams. So personally, I think I would just do it in one go and get it over with. On the other hand, it's quite I'm not sure how much it costs now, but I think 250 US dollars for combined exam. So yeah, if you fail at it, it's an expensive try. Okay, so a couple of questions here. Brian, get CCNA and CCNP. Do I need CCNA service provider? I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think the CCNA is a prerequisite for the CCNP exams. I'm not entirely sure, but we'll have to check that on the Cisco website. Jonathan, good question. Which is better, hands-on learning labs versus simulation labs or both? Okay, so hands-on learning labs versus simulation labs. So simulation, okay, so you're talking about like using GNS3 or um, what kind of labs do you mean? Like, what do you mean the difference between hands-on learning or simulation labs? Anyway, okay, GNS3. Okay, so the funny thing about networking is that you can basically become a professional behind your laptop. Like if you use GNS3, it's an emulator. So it has the exact same commands as a real router does. So if you use GNS3 and you try a lot of scenarios and you do a lot of labs, you can get a lot of experience with that. Yeah? You can become CCIE just by sitting at home um, behind your laptop doing labs all day long. That's how you can become a CCIE. So if you use GNS3, it's an emulator, great idea. There's also simulators like Packet Tracer, or there used to be Boson. They also had a couple of simulators, and I don't recommend using those because everything is simulated. The commands are simulated. The output of the show commands, those are simulated. It's not the real thing. So if something isn't working, you don't know if you did something wrong, or maybe it's an error in the simulator or whatsoever. So if you're doing labs, use an emulator like GNS3, or get your hands on real equipment, routers or switches. Okay, so Paul was talking about GNS3 and CCIE. Yeah, it's true. So iOS 15 is a problem. And okay, Dynamips. So Dynamips is the engine behind GNS3. Yeah, it's becoming a problem. You can still, so if you're doing CCIE, you can still do like 80% perhaps of the studying with GNS3, because most of the protocols are supported in iOS 12.4. But yeah, there's also some stuff that you'll have to do on iOS 15. Good question from Rodney. If you don't have iOS 15, can you do the CCNA? Yeah, you still can. There's only a couple of little things on the CCNA exam that require iOS 15. So if you have some routers and switches that are running 12.4, no problem at all. Don't worry about it. All right. So a couple of questions there. So okay, mind mapping, we talked about. If you haven't tried it, try mind mapping. Also, this was very important to me. It's a little studying tip. Book an exam before you start studying. For me, I think it took me 2 or 3 years before I passed the CCIE lab. And the main reason was that I didn't really have a lab date. So I was like, okay, I'm going to study, and when I feel ready, then I'll book the lab exam and I'll give it a try. And that took 2 years because I never booked the lab. So if you're doing CCNA, CCNP, or CCIE, it really doesn't matter. But just book the exam and then start studying. Because otherwise, if you're like me, you'll just keep waiting and waiting, and there's always something in between, and it will never happen. So just a quick tip, book your exam and then start studying. So CCIE, I think this might be fun to share. I get a lot of questions like, what was my CCIE experience? And I think this was one of the best things that I did. And this picture over here, it's from the Cisco building in Belgium. That's where I did my CCIE lab in Wiegen, Belgium. And this is the main entrance. And it's kind of funny. So you have to be there at like 8 a.m. And when I arrived there were like 3 or 4 other CCIE candidates waiting till we could get inside. Everybody's nervous. We did some small talk. And once we were inside, we had to get a badge. And there were like, I don't know, 10 or 15 people, but nobody talked to each other because everybody was so nervous for the CCIE lab. Yeah. Let me tell you a little something about CCIE. I get a lot of questions like, okay, so how much time do you need if you want to do this, CCIE? And I always say, okay, it will take you easily about 1,000 hours. 1,000 hours maybe doesn't sound that much, but if you divide it by a 40-hour work week, you're looking at 25 weeks of studying. 25 weeks is about 6 months of full-time studying. So if somebody asks me like, can I do the CCIE? I always tell them, yeah, sure you can, but you need to fit in those hours. So those 1,000 hours, can you fit them in next to your work, your private life, and so on? If you can do it, then that's the first step to becoming a CCIE. And for most of us, it means that you will have to make some sacrifices. So, what does it mean? Well, basically, it meant for me no socializing because it's Cisco time. I had to quit doing a lot of things. Didn't go to the gym anymore. That was a bad idea, by the way. I stopped doing a lot of other social stuff, and I was just doing labs all day long. It takes a lot of time, and all I did was studying and labs. Funny thing is, like I said, it took me about 2 or 3 years to do the CCIE. Last year in September, I passed the written exam for the second time. And right after I did the written exam, I passed it, I booked my lab seat right away, 3 months later. And I told everybody, like, okay, the next 3 months I don't have a life anymore. I will skip everything, and the only thing I will do is study because I want to do this. And that's what it took for me to do the CCIE lab. Rodney, if you don't have, oh sorry, has your quality of life improved when you moved up in Cisco Microsoft certification? Oh yeah, that's a very good question. For me, the quality of life has improved a lot since I moved from Microsoft towards Cisco. And the main reason is like, if you're doing Microsoft, I really enjoyed installing stuff like Active Directory, Exchange, setting up terminal servers and such. But what I really didn't like is all the user support. So day one, you're doing all these advanced things like setting up uh, new domain and multiple exchange servers and stuff like that. And the next day, you have some stupid user problems. And the other thing with Microsoft that I really didn't like is like your servers are working fine today, and then suddenly 3 weeks later, there's some kind of a patch by Microsoft, a hotfix, and you see a couple of errors in your Microsoft event viewer. You have no idea what these errors are about, so you just copy and paste the error in Google, and then you're looking at like 10 possible solutions. You try a couple of them, and suddenly it's working it again, but you don't really know what happened or why it's working again. And I kind of got sick of that. And once you do a lot more Cisco, it's really um, more specific. So if you get to see an error on a Cisco router, then it's always a good explanation for it. So you get a useful error message. You can look it up, and the next time you know what was going on your router. The second thing is like, for me, Cisco work, it pays better than Microsoft work. Um, so that's one thing. Money was a factor for me. But also, if you're a network engineer, you don't have to do a lot with users and user support. So you're working on your network, you're doing your magic, but you don't have to do as much with the users anymore. So for me, moving from Microsoft to Cisco was a really a good idea. For me, things improved a lot. On the other hand, um, um, something that was useful for me. So I started out with Microsoft and I started moving to Cisco. I also met a lot of network engineers, and the only thing they knew was like their routers and switches. And they had no idea how Windows works or Linux works. And for me that has been an advantage, knowing both the network stuff but also the server side. For example, I did a lot of wireless, And when you're doing wireless, you also have to set up like certificate servers, and you have to do radius authentication and such. And then it's really useful to know some of the server things, like a little bit of Windows, a bit of Linux, next to your network stuff. Do you recommend knowing other vendors? That's a question by Ryan. Yeah, I do. I think if so, like I said, if you're a network engineer or becoming one, I still think it's a very good idea to know some other things. Know a bit of Microsoft, know a bit of Linux. You don't have to be a specialist, but it's a really good idea to know a little bit more than just your own network stuff. If you're looking at just networking, so I do a lot of Cisco, but there's also Juniper, there's also Huawei, you know, the Chinese guys. Personally, I don't do anything with Huawei, and I also don't do a lot with Juniper. There's a lot of work in Cisco. Maybe for me it would be a good idea as well to do a bit more with Juniper or Huawei, but you can do anything. You can do all of it. So me sticking with Cisco is working so far. That's a good question, Scott. After dealing with Cisco, what do you think about HP hardware? That's a good one. The switches are okay. So I worked with a couple of HP switches. They do what they have to do. It takes a little bit time to get used to the CLI or the graphical interface. So the switches are okay, but I really had some really bad experiences with the HP wireless equipment. I think I spent 1 or 2 days at a customer, and they bought a couple of HP wireless controllers and access points because they were a lot cheaper than the Cisco controllers, but it really didn't work. And after Googling for a day, we found out that there was some bug in the firmware and there was no solution for it and so on. So for me, when I'm working with Cisco, it works basically all the time. And if it doesn't work, it's easy to find the answers, or if you Google for a solution, you'll find it. But yeah, I've had a couple of bad experiences with HP. Let me check. There's a couple of other questions. See a good comment from Paul. He says, okay, Cisco, Juniper, UI, Brocade, HP, you name it, all the same. The really cool thing about networking is that it's always about protocols and standards. If you're learning CCNA, you're learning about OSPF, and OSPF is a standard. Spanning tree, it's a standard. So you're not learning the solution from a vendor or a product from a vendor, but you are learning about protocols. And I think this is really important about network. Let me check what else. From your experience, which Cisco area do you see in highest demand? Routing, switches, wireless, voice, or security? Okay, I always say everybody and the grandma are doing routing and switching. So if you're just doing routing and switching, you don't have a unique position because there's a lot of people who have a CCNP, CCNA for routing and switching. So you should do at least something next to it. Wireless, voice, or security. And well, it's a good question. Like, is wireless voice or voice more important, or security, or data center? It really depends on your environment. So I know a lot of guys who work at an ISP, so obviously they do the data center stuff, and they never touch any wireless networks. If you're working in an enterprise environment, wireless voice are both good things to learn. Um, um, if you're looking at voice, there's a couple of things changing there. Like, I talk a lot to another freelancer trainer. He used to do a lot of Cisco VoIP, but he's also like in the last 2 years or so, I think, Microsoft Link is becoming very popular. And Link is like the VoIP solution from Microsoft, but it integrates really well with Outlook and so on, so the entire Microsoft products. So I think that's becoming a bit more popular than Cisco VoIP, perhaps. But so if you're doing VoIP, for example, don't just do Cisco VoIP, but also do Microsoft Link, maybe some other products, but then you have to become a VoIP guy. I'm not sure if if voice is better than wireless or security, or it's hard to tell. What are your thoughts on Metro Ethernet? Good question. Personally, I don't work with it a lot. I don't see it often. I don't have a lot of people around me asking questions about it and such, so I don't really have an opinion on it. Python, that's a good question by Ryan. So one of my personal goals, I'm 31 years old now, and one of my goals was I've done a lot of networking and Microsoft and Linux, but I also should learn about a programming language. I never did any programming before. So after my CCIE, the first thing I did was, okay, let's learn about Python. So I started learning Python, and yeah, it's a programming language. Some people argue about it and they say, no, it's more like a scripting language, but it's very powerful. And you can do a lot of cool networking stuff with it. I also do quite some Linux work, and yeah, if you're working with Linux, then it's very nice to have some Python knowledge. So yeah, Python, I think it's a very good idea to learn about it. It's not that difficult. It's something else. And if you can do a little bit of programming next to your networking, then yeah, I think it's a very good idea. So personal goal for me, and this year I built a couple of simple Python programs. I built a little Twitter bot. I think it took me like 2 or 3 days, but I did it. And I also built some little networking scripts, some backup stuff, making backups of MySQL databases, and then sending them through FTP to a backup server, and so on. So yeah, it's a good idea to pick up some Python. And if you're interested about it, I know a really good book. But if you're interested, just let me know, and I'll tell you. Yeah, so Ryan, good idea. Please put your Python scripting lessons on your blog. I will. That's something I'm going to do. I want to create a couple of tutorials on network lessons, and it will be about Python. And I will also, yeah, what I want to do is like explain how Python works, give you a couple of tutorials, and also teach you how to create some networking scripts in Python. Tell us about the book. Okay, so let me look it up. I'll give you a link. I found a really great book for this. So I'm heading to Amazon now, and I'll look it up. So Amazon right now. Let me copy and paste. Okay, so the URL is a bit too long, but the book is called Python Programming for the Absolute Beginner. And it's meant for total beginners. So if you never did any programming, then this is a great book. So they'll explain you how to become a programmer in Python, and basically the book is about how to create a game. So you'll learn how to create simple games like a hangman, blackjack, stuff like that. So if you want to learn about Python, check it out. I really enjoyed it. It takes you a couple of weeks to learn it, and then you can also call yourself a programmer. So it's really cool. Network engineer and a programmer. So Anyway, so that's Python. Let's see what else that we have. Okay, so a little bit about CCIE, if you guys want to know. If you want to do the CCIE exam, what do you have to do? First of all, you have to read a pile of books. There's a lot of books you should read. And this is just a picture I found it on the internet. If you want to know the books that I read, I created a little reading list with all the CCIE books that I used. So that's the first thing you have to do. You got to read all of those books. Second thing that you really should do if you're serious about it is you need to use some vendor workbooks. So I have a lot of CCIE related labs on GNS Treeville, but you also need to use some vendor material. And I use the stuff from Internet Network Expert because what they offer is like a complete package for CCIE. There's a couple of workbooks. One workbook is about learning all the different protocols, and the other workbooks are like uh, the full lab. So they kind of recreated the real lab exam, and there's like 20 practice exams that you can do with solutions, and they walk you through the solutions and so on. So something you should do. If you're serious about CCIE, you need to use some vendor workbooks. Okay, if I use the videos or not, or just the books. Good question. I watched a couple of videos from Internet Network Expert. The videos are really good. So yeah, I didn't use them personally because normally when I'm watching videos, watching it and then like after 2 or 3 minutes I'm like, okay, I'm bored and it's too slow, or I want to fast forward and so on. So for me, studying with books works better. Um, but I used a couple of videos. If it's a topic that I really don't know anything about, then it's a good idea to use a video. So there's a CCIE topic. It's called performance routing. I really didn't know anything about it, so I watched the videos and it was very helpful. And so if a topic is completely new to you, I think it's a good idea to first perhaps watch the videos, then read the book about it, and then do some of the labs. Um, so yeah, what I did. Something else? You're welcome, Francis. Something else, like um, if you're using one of those workbooks, I think it's a good idea to use rack rentals. When I started with the CCIE, the first thing I did is that like I built uh, a server. I was running Linux on it with a couple of quad NIC, the network cards. I used GNS3 on it, and then I connected my switches to it, and so on. But it took a lot of time to get everything working, and got rid of DNS3 later on, and I bought all of the routers, but I had to look for the right modules and the right cables and so on. So it takes a lot of time to build your lab. So if you go to do CCIE, the next time I would do it is like just use the rack rentals. You pay the money and you don't have to worry about your hardware, cables, the right iOS version, so on. You just pay, you log in, and you can start studying right away. Quick tip. What else? Like CCIE? Well, I talked about it a little bit, but the first thing you should do is like you need to learn about all the different protocols, all the little topics like OSPF, EIGRP, spanning tree, and so on. The second thing is you should practice full labs. So that's like a recreation of the real lab. That's what you gotta do. There's a lot of troubleshooting labs. Like in the real CCIE lab, there's a troubleshooting section. Most important one perhaps is speed. You need to be very, very fast. And that's one of the most difficult things about the CCIE lab. A lot of people are too slow, and it's like you get 8 hours for the entire exam. Yeah, those 8 hours you will really need them. So this is when you're ready, and I think these were two funny pictures. You need to be like some future surgeon You need a lot of precision. You have to type in your commands, be very exact. You need to know what show commands to use, debug commands for during the lab, and you also have to be super fast. So if you're practicing for the CCIE, once all of the commands are muscle memory, like you can type them, you don't even have to think about it, and solve and fix problems really fast, that's when you're ready for the CCIE lab. But it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of practice that you need. But just a little bit about the CCIE exam. One more thing, I did version 4 of the lab, and it had 2 sections, like 2 hours of troubleshooting, 6 hours of configuration. New exam also has a diagnostic section, so things have changed a little bit. So I'm not entirely sure what the diagnostic section is about, but things are different now. Just one more funny picture. 4 pens, and these were my best friends. I drew so many network diagrams during the studying that I had to do for the lab, and I use these pens a lot, but I was not allowed to do the lab. Yeah. Anyway, if you want to read the full story, I just talked about it a little bit, but if you want to read my entire story, what I think what the lab was like and how I think you should study and my experience and so on, I wrote a blog post on it, network lessons. So if you want to read the whole thing, that's where you can find it. So what's next? So what have I been working on? Well, I'm really excited about this one. If you guys are familiar with Gina Strieveld, then you probably have seen my books before, the CCNA and the CCNP books. But now I'm also writing a CCIE written book, and that's what I'm working on now. And it's taking a lot of time, and hopefully I'll be done in like 8 weeks or so. And once I'm done, I also want to write a couple of other books, and got a lot of requests for like a CCNA security book. That's something I would like to work on, just to do something a little bit different than just routing and switching. And I also want to write some really protocol specific books like BGP, MPLS, maybe OSPF, multicast, quality service, and so on. So that's basically what I am working on right now. So if you're familiar with my other books like CCNA and CCNP, I'm sure you will love the How to Master Python. Yeah, that would be a good one. Huh? Yeah, maybe. Who knows? I really like Python. So yeah, maybe I will. First, we'll do all the routing and switching stuff and so on, and maybe one day we'll do a Python book. It would be very cool, I think, to have a book about Python that teaches you about Python, but also teaches you some networking specific stuff. So who knows? What else am I doing? I'm working a lot on network lessons right now. So I'm writing a lot of blog posts. Some of the stuff is for the book, so for the new CCIE book. But I also have a lot of CCNA blog posts, CCNP, and like for the last year, I'm trying to see if I like blogging more than building labs. Still not entirely sure about it, but yeah, if you haven't seen the website before, take a look. All of my blog posts, they're all free, so there's plenty of stuff to learn there. Only know G and Strieveld. Take a look. Thanks, Ryan. I'm glad to hear that you like the labs. I also hope you like my tutorials if you haven't seen them before. Yeah. Before I check out, go to with the pyramid. Okay, let me show you. Let's go back to the pyramid. And almost there. Here it is. Okay. You need a switch configs to do the labs on your side. Yeah, so the switch labs that I have, I so it, the switching labs, you need real switches for those. I used a couple of 3560 switches for them. So I do have the final configs there on the website, but there are no startup configs. So there's a couple of spanning tree labs, VLAN labs, and such. So I do have the solutions. The YouTube videos are there with the solution. And there's a final config, but there are no startup configs for the switching labs. Maybe this will change sometime, since besides GNS3, there's also iOS on Unix now, so that's the new GNS3 version. They integrated iOS on Unix, and it has switching support. So once it's stable and it's better, if it's yeah, if it's right now it's not very stable. That's what I hear from a lot of people. But when it's working a bit better, then I will also add startup configs for iOS on Unix next to the GNS3 stuff. The 3560, no, those are just layer 3 switches. So they can do routing. They can do routing between VLANs, but they support some of the stuff that routers do, like network address translation, some firewalling and such. You can do that on 3560s. So those are switches that can do routing, but they don't offer all of the advanced stuff that routers do. Right. So any other questions that you guys might have? So question from Scott, like, okay, the new IOU switching module. Yeah, there are a couple of things that can be simulated. I'm not entirely sure what topics, but I think for CCNA, you will be fine. You can do anything with IOU. CCNP, also no problem. And I think perhaps for CCIE, there are a couple of things that you can't. Okay. So Paul says, there are tons of things that cannot be simulated. Okay, so I'm not entirely, I would have to check it. Okay. So that's definitely something to check then, like what features, what switching things are you unable to do with iOS on Unix? Definitely something to check. But can I switch configs? Do you mean the configs on the website? Yeah, through QoS, quality of service, for example. Just studying quality of service, I think using real routers and real switches is a good idea because you want some throughput. You want to see that things can be queued, see that it's working. But did you try this with the new GNS3 version, Paul? The latest one? Yeah, okay. So that's good to know. I haven't played with IU a lot because I have I got a lot of 1841 routers, 2811 routers, 3560 and 3750 switches. So I haven't been using GNS3 for a while now. Yep. Access to real switches, all problems go away. Yeah. So I think that's an important thing. Like if you're using real if you're using those real switches, you don't have to deal with any issues with an emulator, like GNS3 or IOU. So that's an advantage of using real hardware. Spend your time at networking problems and not at emulator problems. Labswitch.blogspot. Switches you can use for an hour for free. Okay, so that's pretty cool if you want to check out a couple of things, if you want to lab for an hour. So anything else? Anything else you guys want to ask me or want to know, or if you want some advice? Or
This is John. I'm not sure if you heard, didn't really hear your answer to my question. I was asking about iOS. Like, I've never really used GS3. I've used Packet Tracer, and
yeah.
the features are pretty limited on there. So I'm just wondering what other people kind of do to use GNS3 effectively, unless they have some hooked up for switch iOSs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Packet Tracer is probably fine for CCNA, but it's very limited with the commands that it offers. So if you're studying for CCNP, then Packet Tracer probably won't do a good job. And even if you want to try something else that's not on the CCNA, then it's Packet Tracer will be too limited. Yeah, okay. I live in the Netherlands. My name. You're welcome. I don't speak French. I had it at school for 2 years, but that's like 15 years ago. And the only thing I can say is bonjour nowadays, and that's it. My accent is because I'm Dutch, so that's my first language. So like William said, CCIE, CCNA, that's Packet Tracer. If you're doing anything else, I would prefer GNS3 or real hardware. GNS3 because it's an emulator, so it still supports everything that that the iOS version that you're running has to offer. I would prefer GNS3 to Packet Tracer. Thanks, Scott. I'm glad to hear that you like my books and the labs, and that's the main reason that I'm still doing this. Like, I get a lot of comments from people that they enjoyed my labs and the material, and it's good to know that that I can help people. Thanks, Frank. Enjoyed it. Well, guys, you all also thanks for being here. This was the first time I did a webinar. I didn't know what to expect or how it would be like, but yeah, I also enjoy it. I have a lot of fun here. Really, yeah. I recorded a lot of those videos, and then basically you're just talking to your screen all the time, and nobody is you don't get any response. So it's quite fun to see the chat here and hearing the voice sometimes. So yeah, and so any future webinar, yeah, that might be cool. Maybe we can do a technical topic if William wants me. Yeah, yeah. That might be fun. Do it another time, maybe a technical topic for, I don't know, CCNA, CCP, CCIE. Doesn't matter. Sounds like fun. Paul is saying, okay, maybe you can come to a CCIE study group. We need torture. CCIE is a lot of torture. So is that a study group, a virtual one, or is it a study group somewhere in New York? Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, sure. Sounds like fun. Like I said, it was the first time, but it was fun. So I'm up to do this another time. If you have Well, I want to visit New York. I've been there once. It's like 6 years ago, but I'd like to go there another time, maybe soon. So if I do, I'll make sure to visit the meetup group. Okay, that's good. Yeah, and Rob is okay. I may check out your CCIE book. If you look at network lessons, if you look at my tutorials and the blog posts, they're kind of written in the same way as my book. So there's a lot of free stuff there, but if you like the blog posts over there, then you'll probably also like the. So take a look. Yeah, I had a great time. It was a lot of fun. So thanks for having me. And yeah, if you want to do this another time, then let me know. I'll be happy.